My gentle, and of course very modern apes, I am here to narc on the scientific community. I hate to say it, but you have been tricked. You've been duped, you have been bamboozled, and to put it rather bluntly, you've been Smeckledorfed. I say this because I am about to break some very tough news to you. Species are fake. Yes, that's right, the holy concept of organism differentiation is actually just a clever ruse. You might be thinking, that is ridiculous. Species are clearly real, as anyone, perhaps even a 5-year-old, could tell you that a giraffe and an elephant are different species. And to that I would say, perhaps. But what is a species really? Go ahead, I'll wait.
Discussion and debate. Atheism, evolution, Bible study, prophecy, and doctrine, social issues, and everything Christian. These are Hot Topics with your host Eric, aka Wolf. Welcome.
I'll wait. Don't feel bad if you find that defining what a species is a bit difficult. It may even feel a little bit frustrating because species seem to be so dang intuitive, right? A dog and a cat are so clearly just different things, right? But cataloging precisely what it is that demarcates the line between a dog and a cat, or any living organism from another for that matter, is actually a very difficult task indeed, and it's one that Darwin noted himself. In fact, this has been a problem since Linnaeus invented taxonomy, even before Darwin. So in order to sort of come up with a solution to the problem, biologists through the centuries have been proposing different species concepts, if you will, in order to attempt to unify the field of biology in one way or another as far as how it is that we all define a species. You will be shocked to learn that biologists don't all agree on which species concept is actually the best species concept. And I would propose, along with many others before me, that this is because species are simply a human concept that we are imposing on nature. They're not real.
Hello, this is Eric, aka Wolf, and let me introduce you to Gutsick Gibbon. Gutsick Gibbon is a pretty interesting little personality. I've seen her debate many times on Modern Day Debate. And unfortunately, when I contacted Modern Day Debate and they were looking for somebody to debate me, they contacted Gutsick Gibbon to debate the flood with me, and she never got back with them. She won't debate the flood with me, evidently. And that's okay. That's okay. But I want to respond to her bamboozlement with the term species, because, you know, I've debated atheists for decades now, and one thing that I've noticed is when we get around to the concept of species, they're floored. They're confused. And the only ones I've ever seen who had a problem with the word species are evolutionists, because species, the term species, the word usage, and etc., the concept, screws them up, quite frankly, in several different ways. Now, we'll go into this in a little bit here. So, Gutsick Gibbon, she claims that the term species is fake, that it's not real. Well, let me draw a little comparison here. That's like saying that the term mammal isn't real, it's fake, okay? Now, it is kind of abstract in that it's human application, it's a human idea. It's a concept by which we can separate things in different groups, just like we have mammals, we have reptiles, we have amphibians, etc. Okay? These are just as fake as the word species. So they're not fake at all. They're real concepts. There's a number of problems with the word species, the biological concept of species, when it comes to the evolutionist. Now, what is a species? It's clearly defined. It's not hard at all. The word species is simply this. For over 300 years, the biological concept of species, since before Darwin, 150 years before Darwin, it was defined as a group of like animals who are capable of interbreeding and producing fertile offspring. It's that simple. They have the capability of breeding. They have the capability of producing fertile offspring. That defines a species, period. That's all it is. Now, how hard is that? Well, evidently it's very hard. Because, you see, they have to give the illusion that macroevolution happens, and the term species gets in the way of this. Now, we do see things speciate from time to time, in that certain groups or populations, certain groups within populations, may lose the ability to interbreed with the parent group. And so what they do is, the term is speciate. That simply means they're no longer capable of interbreeding with the parent group. But, so they form a new species, but then what happens? Do they create a different genus? No. A different type of animal? No. For instance, some bacteria may speciate from their parent population, but they're still bacteria. They don't evolve into anything outside of their group. And it's the same with dogs, wolves, etc. Now, you see, they try to classify animals in a way, though, that gives us the appearance of macroevolution, because they don't have any real examples of it. And so many animals are misclassified. We have different groups of animals that should be classified as the same species, because they have the capability of interbreeding and the capability of producing fertile offspring, and yet they're defined as a different species. A good example of this is the gray wolf, the dog, and the coyote. You have the gray wolf and the dog listed as the same species, but then you have the coyote listed as a separate species, a species apart from them. The only problem is, you see, we have what's called coy dogs, which are a combination of coyote and dog. We have the coy wolf, which is a combination of the coyote and the wolf. So all of these animals, wolves, dogs, coyotes, they're all able to interbreed, and they're all capable of producing fertile offspring. So they should, by definition, be listed as the same species. But they're not, for the sake of giving the false impression of evolution. Mankind is the same way. It used to be that the Neanderthal was listed as the forefather of modern man, the ancestor of modern man. And then we recently found Denisovan. Now, both of these are listed as some kind of a cousin to the Homo sapien. The only problem is, we know that the Neanderthal interbred with modern humans, the Homo sapien, and we know that the Denisovan interbred and produced fertile offspring with the Homo sapien. And we know that they interbred with one another and produced fertile offspring. We know this. So this makes Neanderthal, Denisovan, and Homo sapiens the same species. And yet, for the sake of giving the false impression of evolution, we are not listed as the same species. So, you see, the word species, this is why evolutionists have such a hard time with the word species, because it blows their theory. It takes away that illusion of evolution where there is no evolution. That's why I suggest, that's why Gutsick Gibbon and all the atheist evolutionists like her have a problem with the biological term of species, the biological definition. Now, granted, there are different biological definitions of species. For instance, we have the species for plants. We have species for organisms that reproduce through mitosis, or single-celled organisms that split in half to create new single-celled organisms. Of course, species is defined differently then. But in the case of sexually reproductive animals, we have the one definition. They're capable of interbreeding. They're capable of producing fertile offspring. How hard is that to apply? It's not. So, despite all their excuses, it's a very simple thing to apply this. Just like it's a very simple thing to apply the definition of mammal, or reptile, or amphibian. It's very simple. So it's only hard if you're trying to cover up for false impressions, like the false impression of evolution. So there you go, Gutsick Gibbon. That should help begin making it easier for you, but let's see what else she has to say.
The problem with species is that we as humans are attempting to apply a static concept, that of species, to a dynamic process, the ever-evolving members of the tree of life.
And bingo, we have identified the problem that evolutionists have with the word species. They're trying to use species in such a way that it justifies their presuppositional idea, their preconceived notion, their unscientific methodology of assuming that evolution occurred, and that we have what's called the tree of life of common descent, and that all of these species have to align themselves with this tree of life of common descent given to us by Mr. Darwin. Now, what is the tree of life of common descent? Basically, it's this. There is what's called a last universal common ancestor. That means that it's also known as the LUCA, L-U-C-A, last universal common ancestor. And basically what it is, the LUCA, is that single-celled organism that they say every life form on Earth today evolved from, whether it's plant, animal, single-celled organism, it doesn't matter. Every life form today is said to have descended from that, and it assumes or claims that there is a clear chain of evidence, boom, 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 that there is a tree of life of common descent. You'll find these also known as phylogenetic or phylogeny trees. And in other words, the modern bird is said to have evolved from the Archaeopteryx, which is said to have evolved from the theropod dinosaur. And there are thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of transitional fossils in between all of these groups. So, for instance, again, you have the Pakicetus, a dog-sized land mammal that was said to have lived millions and millions of years ago, and it eventually evolved into dolphins and whales, porpoises, etc. So there is a tree of life of common descent, they say. The only problem is, you see, when you're trying to use something to pigeonhole a presupposed idea, pigeonhole it into a presupposed idea, a presuppositional position, when you're trying to pigeonhole species so that it fits your imagined tree of life of common descent, well, if that tree of life of common descent is fictional and doesn't really exist, you're going to have a problem. And evolutionists have a problem. That's the reason, classically, evolutionists have always had a fit with the term species. Creationists don't have a problem with that word. We're just happy and fine. We can deal with a definition. We understand a species is a very simple concept. If it has the potential to interbreed, and it has the potential to produce a fertile offspring, it is, by definition, the same biological species as far as sexually reproducing animals are concerned. Nothing hard about that at all. But why is it hard for the atheist? Well, I'm going to tell you. They presuppose that tree of life of common descent. They assume that evolution occurred. But I've got some sad news for them. Craig Venter is the world's foremost geneticist, probably the most famous geneticist by far, one of the most sought-after geneticists by far, probably the most brilliant geneticist ever. He was the fellow who first mapped the human genome before teams of government and corporate scientists could. He also has the distinction of being the only man to have ever removed the DNA of a single-cell E. coli bacteria cell, and he rewrote his own genetic code, DNA code, and he injected it back into this E. coli bacteria cell, and it began reproducing. He's the only man to ever do that. So, he knows what he's talking about, let's put it this way. And what does Craig Venter say about the tree of life of common descent? He said it doesn't exist. He says it's a fiction. He says that DNA proves there is no tree of life of common descent. So, of course, there's going to be a problem trying to pigeonhole species into something that's fictional. You see, it's not the word species that's a fraud. It's not the word species that's a fake. It's their assumption that the tree of life of common descent exists. But let's hear from Mr. Venter himself. Don't take my word for it.
I'm not so sanguine as some of my colleagues here that there's only one life form on this planet. We have a lot of different types of metabolism, different organisms. I wouldn't call you the same life form as the one we have that lives in pH 12 base that would dissolve your skin if we dropped you in it.
Oh, I've got the same genetic code. We'll have a common ancestor.
Well, you don't have the same genetic code. In fact, the mycoplasmas use a different genetic code and would not work in your cells. So there are a lot of variations on the theme.
But you're not saying it belongs to a different tree of life from me, are you?
Well, I think the tree of life is an artifact of some early scientific studies that aren't really holding up. So the tree, there may be a bush of life.
Right. Yes.
Bush.
I don't like that word.
But that's only in.
All right, I concede that point. Yeah.
So there is not a tree of life, and in fact, from
I'm intrigued at Craig saying that the Tree of Life is a fiction. I mean...
So, as Mr. Venter says, there is no tree of life of common descent, Miss Gutsick Gibbon. So your presupposition is false. And that is what's fake. The tree of life of common descent. Not the biological definition of species that we've had for over 300 years that should be very easy to conform to if you weren't trying to preserve your false impression, your false claim of evolution in the tree of life of common descent. That's how science works, not with preconceived ideas. We have to do away with the preconceptions and stick with the observations.
You're not saying it belongs to a different tree of life from me, are you?
Well, I think the tree of life is an artifact of some early scientific studies that aren't really holding up. So the tree, there may be a bush of life.
Right. Yes.
Bush, I don't like that word.
But that's only in
All right, I concede that point. Yeah.
So there is not a tree of life, and in fact, from...
I'm intrigued at Craig saying that the Tree of Life is a fiction.
And Miss Gutsick Gibbon, all due respect, there you go, your problem is solved. All you have to do is approach science as if you were a scientist, practicing science, not indoctrinated and indoctrinating the people around you, saying, evolution is a fact. No, evolution is not a fact. You have no tree of life of common descent. It's no wonder the word species gives you such a headache. Understand, it's not the definition of species that's fake. It's no more fake than mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians. These are all real concepts and legitimate ways of classifying animals around us. The problem is your presupposition. So if you approach science as though it is science, and as though you were a scientist, you wouldn't pigeonhole your preconceived notion into these classifications, make them conform to your preconception. Stop that and you have no more problem. With that being said, God bless you. Have a great day. Thank you very much, everybody who listened. And I hope you've learned something. Please comment. Let me know what you think. I don't care if you disagree with me. And Gutsick, I like you, I respect you. But you're wrong. God bless you and have a great day. This is Eric, a.k.a. Wolfbitten, and we are out.